first of all, I'll do a little intro, and then Steve, I'll also get you to intro yourself. So I'm Tash. I am the head of marketing at BlueMelon. I've been in marketing for about 14 years across a range of different businesses, from retail organizations like Lush right through to agencies, large and small businesses. And I've really been working on storytelling, I suppose, through this whole set of work in different brands and businesses that I've worked in, and found it a really powerful tool. So excited to share that with you all. Steve, give us a big intro of who you are, and then we will kick off.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. My name's Stephen Hunt. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Music Health, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a sec. But essentially, we're trying to transform healthcare by reintroducing music into it. And I'll explain why a little bit later on. But yeah, I've also been a storyteller my whole life. I used to be an actor and a musician, and then I actually went into the media industry. So much like yourself, Tash, I was in marketing, and really had to learn the power of storytelling for brands right the way through to also being a salesperson and actually having to develop a pitch and pitch it. So it's fundamental to what I do all the time, even now in this role, whether it's pitching to investors, pitching to new customers, or or talking to people like you.
Yeah, awesome. Funny, I'm also a musician, and also I did theatre growing up, so we got that in common, which is cool. Awesome. And just before we kick off, I'd just like to also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the land on which we work, play, and tell stories. A really awesome story that I learned about Aboriginal culture was about this bird bunjil. And I will send you a link to share that story with you after the webinar as well. It's one that's really stuck with me, about the awesome culture and the land on which we get to work on. So today, what we are going to cover is why storytelling. That's going to be a really important one. We're also going to cover human-centricity and how we put the human at the center of all of that storytelling that we do. We're going to cover the anatomy of a narrative and how to build one, the opportunity on LinkedIn, and then we're going to hand over to Steve and tell the Music Health story. And throughout, we want this to be quite interactive. So we've popped in a few questions, and if you could look to answer them in the Q&A section as well, so we can see what you have to say and share your stories as well as we go. So the first question we've got for you is, if you could describe stories in the medtech space, what 3 words come to mind for you? So pop your answers in the chat, and would love to hear all sort of your thoughts on how it lands at the moment. Give you some time to do that. Anyone got some words that they want to share in the chat? All righty. Don't be shy. We'll move on, and as you go, you can fill that out. Oh, you got a couple in the Q&A here. Cool. Awesome. All right. Personal impact, scientific, weird combo. Yes. Personalization, proactive, joined up, hope, awareness, exploration. That's really nice, Dawn. Awesome. All right. Keep throwing your thoughts in as we go. All right. So the next bit, I'm going to play you something, and I'd love to hear what you think of it after.
Baby, hi. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to Earth, home to 8 billion humans who were also once babies. Even him. Right now, you only need to know 2 of them, and together you make a family. These are also families. Neat, huh? Now you're kind of a big deal around here. Watch this. Do anything right now. That baby is called control. Enjoy it. Oh, and this? Oh, yeah, that won't fly when you're older, kid. And you get to have your favorite meal whenever you're hungry. You'll go through a phase where you think everything is edible. Most of it isn't. But sometimes you can let it sleep. Or not. Oh, so Dan's head isn't all upside down. That's just a beard. Yep, being a baby is pretty great. Everyone is always thrilled to see you. Well, almost everybody. You can go whenever nature calls. That's where we come in. We're Huggies. Hi, we make these and other stuff to help your parents keep you comfy. So you have time for something important, like finding your foot. Go easy, kid. Well, where'd he go? See, the thing is, baby, it's a crazy world, but you'll grow to love it. Well, most of it anyway. Get some rest now, kiddo. We'll be here when you wake up, which should be right about. Huggies, we got you, baby.
Super cute.
Baby. Baby.
All right. So how does everyone feel after that? It's pretty, it's so fun and nice to sort of see a story and almost not know what the brand is until the very end. So yeah, Steve, any thoughts or anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just thought it's super cute and funny, and it's nice how they kind of weave themselves in at the end. It's kind of a great integration and reveal. But yeah, it's just a feel good, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And it puts sort of both the parent journey and the baby's life at the forefront of what the story is that they're trying to tell, which is really cool. If anyone else wants to share any thoughts, please do in the chat or in the Q&A. All right, so nothing like data to center everything that we're talking about. Obviously, we don't want to harp on too much about data because we're here to tell stories, but there is some really interesting facts that are, I guess, foundational to why this is really important. And the first is that, people don't really remember data. So when you think about this slide, you're not going to remember it after, because most of the time people just don't care about it. So what they do care about is stories, and 70% of people remember stories. And it makes sense, because when you have an emotional connection to something, you're more likely to remember it. And there are a few reasons for that. A little bit more data to come, but I promise you we're not going to harp on too long about it. So when we tell stories, or when we're told stories, we release hormones, so oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, and serotonin. And since you all work in MedTech, you will probably have more knowledge on this than I will, but basically all these different hormones that we release help us retain that information. And I would assume that when we read data, we probably don't release hormones, because most of the time we don't care as much. But when we tell a story that has a narrative that we can relate to, we actually have a physical and chemistry reaction as well as an emotional reaction, which is really cool. And last one, I promise. So 55% of people love a brand story. This was some data we pulled from Harvard and some of their storytelling work. And 45% of people will share that story, and 15% of people will actually buy after they've read that story. So really, really interesting to understand sort of people's motivations, what gets them going, and what makes them actually take action. That was the last bit of data, I promise. So the next one that we've got for you is a bit of a question. So please feel free to put your answers in the Q&A or in the chat. What are some of the challenges that you face when you're building your story as a brand or as a business? We'll give you a couple minutes and chuck your thoughts into the chat.
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, what are some of your challenges, Steve, while we wait for people to share theirs?
Well, I think coming up with a strong narrative, a lot of the time when you're trying to convey some information, there might not be a story that's attached to it, but part of the magic is trying to find a way to turn anything you're trying to convey into a story. So a bit like what you were saying with those statistics, they're pretty dry and boring on their own, but if we can find a way to weave them into some sort of narrative that's a bit more compelling, people are more likely to get engaged and remember. And I've seen this done so many times at conferences where you get someone who stands up and they kind of read their slides and you're bored as hell because they're just kind of reading what's on them, versus someone who doesn't even rely on the slides as much and can get up there and just start telling you an incredible story about maybe their life or a personal experience, and then weave in the point of what they're trying to convey. And it's a night and day difference. So I think, but to the challenge, it's like, you've got to find a way to find a story that is personal to you, that is going to engage, but that still gets your point across. And that's it's kind of sometimes a difficult matchup.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. So we've got a few notes here from you all. Building a compelling story that is true to your brand and making the story believable. Yeah, for sure. That emotional connection piece and the authenticity piece is something we'll touch on next, which is really cool. Yeah, same, Sally, emotional connection, but also including stats. Yeah. And I guess that's about maybe how you tell the story, and how you use the information to create a compelling message. And then catering to the audience, general public versus clinicians. Yeah. And a lot of people, have various audience groups. A lot of people are in B2B and B2C, or have some kind of double-sided marketplace, for example, where they're sort of talking to lots of different people. So looking at personas and things like that can really help. All right. So next, the anatomy of a narrative is a really interesting sort of piece of work. Now, there's a lot of ways to, I guess, go about telling a story, and there's a lot of different frameworks to look at. But this is one that we particularly like. It's by a woman named Kendra Hall. And the idea is really that there's three parts to this narrative. There is the normal, I guess what we consider as the current or established way that things are or were before. Then there is this moment in a story where there's a massive explosion, a moment of emotional impact. Something happens that is pivotal to the character's change or story or message or way of being. And then there is a new normal from that. And I think, a really good example of this is COVID, where we had this normal way of life, we had this massive global explosion, and then we had a new normal. And there were so many stories connected by people's shared experience and people's isolation and all these different things that happened during that time that created this new sense of normal and what that is. And so there's lots of different ways to kind of think about how you place a person in this kind of narrative, and how you, I guess, construct something that creates moments of emotional impact for people. So now we're going to give you an example, and I'll play a video for you as well for this. This one you might have seen before. It's a fairly old campaign, but it was run by GE, and it was really off the back of fear that was created or had by children needing to get MRIs. And so the team at GE looked at how they could center the child's experience in a really positive way, because what they were finding is about 80% of the kids had to be sedated before put into these machines, and they're already fairly traumatic experiences, needing to, understand whatever maybe illness they had and things like that. So they really look to center the experience by creating stories. So I'll share the video with you, and then we can look at how this narrative process works for this.
Never seen the sky so blue. The birds are singing, I got nothing to do. Hey, it's a sunny day. My pocket's empty, my cupboard's bare. You call me illogical, I just don't care.
So in this case, the normal was pre these adventure series with these MRI, was that, you know, you'd go into this pretty stark room, and you'd probably all know what it's like, lay down in a very scary, very loud scan, and go through an experience that was quite traumatic, especially for children. And what they found was that after creating these series and really putting themselves in the child's shoes, using imagination to be able to create a whole range of different experiences, putting the child at the center of whatever that story was going to be. Either they were a superhero of some kind, or they were, you know, going on a fishing trip, or they were doing something really exciting, and they were the main character in that story. And what it actually resulted in was this new experience that was more fun, more engaging, and really targeted to the specific group, both the parents and the children. And what they saw was that only 5% of children, you know, needed to be sedated to be put through MRIs after this work. So it's really, really pivotal stuff, which is really cool. And so I guess when you look at, so there's 3 parts of how you build the narrative. And then once you're starting to get that framework, you can look at how you build in different components. So the first one is that identifiable character. So, you know, if GE had gone out and just put their MRI, you know, product on the market, hospitals probably wouldn't have bought it, but they created a whole story by putting the children at the front of the, you know, thinking and the ideation and the imagination, instead of talking about the product itself, which, you know, is just a big machine. They created authentic emotion by, you know, there are data points there around the 80% down to 5%. That's really exciting, and that's really massive and helpful. But the emotional connection is using the awe-inspiring, you know, way that children are, and it's using their joy to bring a new light to this product that is somewhat challenging. And you create that moment in their minds by being able to, you know, put them in a world that's really exciting, where they get to use all parts of their imagination. And then knowing your audience is really important. So both knowing that children love to create worlds and imagine things, and that parents want their children to have a good experience, even though maybe they're dealing with some kind of challenging thing that they're facing together. And so I guess this is, you know, the next part around the ripple of a story. So this GE campaign reached millions of people, and it was because they centered everything around the people that they were there to serve, rather than the sale or the product that they had created. And so the ripple effect of that is obviously millions of views, but also people sharing these stories and sharing in the community, and sharing, you know, their own experiences with their children or potentially themselves. So it built a sense of community, it created a sense of belonging, and it centered the people who were going through those experiences as the storytellers themselves, which was a really powerful piece of work. And so next we want to move on to how to use the LinkedIn platform. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, the anatomy of a narrative, which covers the way that you pull the story together from normal to explosion to new normal, and then those 4 components about the character, authentic emotion, creating that moment, and then knowing your audience, the specific details. But now we want to figure out, how do we format that story into the way that LinkedIn, or, you know, any platform, because you're probably building content for lots of different platforms, but we're LinkedIn experts at BlueMelon. So we wanted to share with you the things that, you know, we use, and some top tips in 3 key areas. So, you know, there's lots of different ways to tell your story and lots of different approaches, but we want to cover video because it's the most consumed type of content on the internet and continues to grow. We want to cover some imagery. We're going to talk about carousels today, and we want to cover some copywriting. So there's some really key top tips that you can look at here, which are essentially that when you're creating videos, you really want to make sure that they are short and sweet. So about 1 minute or less. Our attention spans continue to reduce, and the younger generation coming through has an even shorter attention span because they are receiving so much data all the time. So the shorter, the better. Really clear messaging will also help you frame exactly what you're trying to say in a really short space of time. You know, there's this idea of Occam's razor as the simplest way that you can tell the story or get the message across. That's the way that you should do it. And always adding subtitles is a really helpful thing, just providing accessibility. And a lot of the time, people are watching videos in silence. So it's a really important thing to, you know, make sure that you're offering that viewing pleasure for them. And then always having a clear call to action. So just making sure that, you know, you've always got something that's really, really clear that they can do afterwards. So are you asking them to book in a call? Are you asking them to learn more and go check out your website or have a chat with you? Whatever that is, make sure that your ask is really clear for them as well. All right. And now moving on to organic carousels. So this is a really interesting one. Probably you've noticed a few different things that can happen on your LinkedIn company page when you want to post a series of images together. So carousels are a really great way to tell a longer form story across, you know, a number of image sets, as well as your copy at the top and at the bottom as well. So what we recommend is 5 to 7 slides works best. You can load up to 10, but 5 to 7 seems to be the sweet spot. And the best way to actually upload carousels is to load them as one PDF file, not individual images. So you can load it as in LinkedIn, there's like a little 3 dots. You click that and then you can upload a document. And that's the better experience where you get the little arrow that you can click through. And what you want to do is keep the text and imagery really large and engaging. You can connect the images across you know, each of the 5 to 7 slides. Make sure that your message is really core and front and center, and that you've got a call to action on your last card as well, so that it's really clear and exciting for people to view. And then conversation ads. Now, these are an ad format. And so it's a slightly different thing. What we've been talking about is some organic content, but conversation ads are essentially a tool for you to get in the in-mail inboxes on LinkedIn of core target audiences that you might have. And so they're really dynamic, and you can have a few different messages within a conversation ad set. And how that works is sort of like a choose your own adventure in a way. So you write an initial message to a specific core audience that you're looking to go after. And we recommend about 500 words or less is best for each message set, with about 2 call to actions in each message. So you might have a learn more or book a chat, or you might have a you know, learn more that goes to a website, or a learn more that goes to a second message. And that second message can have more information in it, could deep dive, it could have a downloadable infographic or something else to share some deeper knowledge. What you can also do with these conversation ads is you can have A/B test options. So you can test 2 sets of copy or 2 sets of CTAs so that you understand what's actually resonating for that group of people that you're targeting. And the last thing you want to do with conversation ads is really send your message from a leader in your organization, so that the person on the other side receiving it feels, you know, like it's a real person of influence who's sending them this message to their in-mail inbox. And so I guess really to close on this, the idea is that, you know, you've got now a bit of a framework for how to tell a story, and then you've got all these formats for how to put those stories into action on the LinkedIn platform. And so now what we want to do is hand over to Steve to give us some real live examples of what this looks like in action, and also just to generally hear about the Music Health story as well. So Steve, we'll hand over to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that. And that's an awesome setup. I think this is such a really interesting topic, and something that if you can master, you can really turn into a powerful, leverageable tool for your business. I've been fortunate enough, I think I mentioned earlier that I've been a salesperson for, well, I was trained very early in doing that and telling stories for sales. And in doing that, I was lucky enough that I've been using LinkedIn for a long time to harass people to buy things, whether it was when I was in the media industry, or when I went into the music industry, or now in the healthcare industry, and now with also venture capital investors. So I've kind of amassed almost 10,000 people that I've connected to, and not for any reason of trying to build a big audience, but just out of purely trying to sell them things. But over time, people I've built friendships and relationships with, and it's actually quite a powerful network. And so LinkedIn's become a really powerful tool for me personally, but also for any business I'm in, to be able to get the word out there and start to spread what's going on. And so the current thing I'm working on is Music Health. As I mentioned, we're transforming healthcare, and we're using music to do that. But we call it precision music. So I'll explain what that is in a sec. But oh, here we go. So precision music, it's defined as music that's personal to you, but that can shift your neurological state, so how you feel. And if you think about it, every time you listen to music, it can change the way you feel. And we spoke about that earlier. Sometimes it's the release of those hormones, because music is a fantastic way to tell a story itself, right? And but I came to Music Health because of my co-founder, Nick, who I met when I was working at Universal Music Group. And Nick was one of the world leaders in applying AI technologies to music. So he developed something called the AI music brain that listens to music and interprets the way it would make someone feel. And it was this incredible technology. And so while he was working on that, I was at Universal, and I was trying to sort of build positions for them about what was going to happen in the future. And one of those positions was that music had this incredible place and belonging in healthcare. And we were seeing its evolution for fitness. So that was leading into wellness with things like Headspace and Calm. And just over the hill of that was healthcare, but there was no music in healthcare. and you just saw in that amazing GE example how powerful it was when they actually introduced some fun into a very sterile hospital setting for those kids. But we're all kids at heart. Like, where's all the fun for us too? Hospitals are a really, really like terrible sonic environment, but every sound we hear is triggering an emotional response in us. So the thesis really was, if music has been used by every ancient human civilization that we know of, including the Indigenous people of Australia, the didgeridoo is like one of the oldest forms of music therapy we know of. Then why is it not part of the way we heal in modern times? It's just missing. And if you could imagine, if you could reintroduce music into healthcare broadly as an ecosystem, you could improve healthcare, which is what we all want. So that was the idea. And we decided to start with Vera. And Nick actually, when we were just sort of tossing around the idea of the company, he found a film called Alive Inside. And I highly recommend that you go and watch it, or at least Google it and watch some clips on YouTube. And it will show you the absolute transformation that the right music can have on someone living with dementia. They literally get quickened, and they go from being kind of quite inert or scared or not knowing where they are to suddenly being very awake and alert. Much more likely to remember the names and faces of people around them. They've got much better control of their fine and gross motor skills. They're much more likely to remain calm because they're less scared. And so we've productized that impact and that effect into a tool that empowers that caregiver to be able to choose the right music at the right time that is personally significant to that person with dementia. Because unfortunately, they don't remember the music that they love, even though the musical memories are less impacted than all the other memories. They're actually all in there, but we've got to find the right music that can stimulate their brain. And that is the real magic of what we do, because no one can tell us, and we go and work it out in about 2 minutes flat. So we've won a few awards for this, but that's just the beginning. that's been a really, really exciting journey. But if you flick to the next slide, so I'm actually, I'm doing a TED talk about that, by the way, which is going to be recorded 1st of September. So that's really exciting. You'll sort of hear a whole journey about that. But when it comes to storytelling, so as I said, I've been working on employing the skill of storytelling throughout my career in very many different ways. And I've got a friend called Doug Cronin who created a company, gosh, I think it's about 5 years ago now, called Our Race, and it's a not-for-profit. And Doug's a dear friend of mine, and he founded it on the thesis that we really need to respect the rights of the story holder, and that a lot of people, big media agencies, advertisers, but not just them, but also even the content creators, the TV networks, the newspapers, a lot of these people are taking someone else's story and then turning it into something else without their permission. And so there was actually a really incredible film that he just brought out to Australia called Subject, which sort of talked about this. But so he founded Our Race because what he was in particular really trying to address was the misuse of the stories of people who were immigrants to Australia or refugees or people from a First Nations background, and having people take those stories and tell them without permission and without authenticity. And he just felt that that was really ethically wrong. So he's created a framework around that. And I've been an advisor to Doug since he started. So I've been kind of watching the journey and watching this realization kind of unfold. And I think it's really important that everybody who is telling a story actually goes and has a really good think about the subject that they're telling the story from. Make sure you've got the right permissions to take that story and you should really be involving that person all along the way and making sure that you're treating it with the right ethical consent. So, but there's a whole test thesis, which you can see some of the parts here that you can use to make sure that you're treating the story holder correctly in pulling it together. And now this came to bear for us because if we flick to the next page, which is a video, I won't make you watch all of this, but just don't play it yet. So, you know, we got our product out there and things were looking pretty good and started to get people really interested, and we were trying to do some press, and the press that I was pitching to kept coming back and saying to me, Steve, it's really cool. I love your product. It's awesome, but it's not interesting. Like, what is interesting is the story of the people who use it. And so if you could come to me with a case study, someone else's story, really, right? Then that would be really powerful, and we would take that to air. And so I was like, right, of course, no problem. So I started, you know, going and talking to my customers and realizing some of them are public companies and they don't necessarily want a current affair, which was one of the companies we were talking to coming into film in their care home. And anyway, and I've started to find this actually really hard to find anyone who wanted to talk about having dementia. And there's a lot of stigma associated with the condition. And then also within that, I had to find someone whom I felt we had enough trust with to be able to not only tell their story in an appropriate way, but also find a news outlet that had a journalist and an editor that would also understand this framework that I had, you know, spent so much time with Doug supporting. So it was a really, really tricky thing to do, and remains to this day very difficult. And so, but we found Barbara and her daughters are both, you know, work in the healthcare profession. They both understand dementia from a very academic perspective. And then we actually got to partner with an incredible journalist who did the story and took a lot of time working with us before we filmed and after we filmed to make sure everybody felt comfortable with the way the story was being told. So I might play a little bit of it, just give it a minute or so. And you can find this on YouTube if you want to watch the whole thing.
She's someone that enjoyed to laugh, and she enjoyed dressing up. There was an element of finesse. She loved her little family. She worked 2 jobs so that we actually had an education. And later in life, she became our good friend. Here you go.
Barbara is one of nearly 500,000 Australians living with dementia. For daughters Barbara and Genevieve, it's been 19 long years.
Mum was around in her early 70s when she started to have problems with her memory. And it was just little things. You'd plan an outing and she'd say, where are we going again? What are we doing today? But I think the biggest stimulus or trigger to Mum's decline was Dad's death. And when Brian, my dad, died, she kind of lost a soulmate.
Once someone enjoyed a laugh and a good conversation, Barbara is now basically non-verbal and requires care around the clock.
It's hard work.
There you go. I mean, you can see that we took so much time there, like over a minute, to establish who she was and what she meant to her daughters. And it goes on, obviously, to talk about the music and things like that, but watch that in your own time. But it was really important because, of course, Barbara, who's the subject there, she's nonverbal, she can't give consent. So we're relying on her daughters to give that consent and to be very comfortable with the way that we're treating the story. So, but yeah, this is a challenge that we face with our story itself. How can we tell the story through our customers when it's such a sensitive topic? And this is probably a very common thing with a lot of MedTech and health tech. But yeah, if you go to the next one. So when we talk about LinkedIn, so a lot of what we're trying to do is sort of get in there and have opinions. I think LinkedIn's just a place where it's my Facebook. Like I don't really go to Facebook or Instagram. I find if I'm passing time in a social media way, which is probably, I don't do that much. Like I'd rather talk to people in person, but if I am, I'm there because I'm getting enriched, I'm learning, and then I'm commenting on my friends that are doing great things. And I'm really interested in what they're doing with their businesses and so on. But you can see here, the kind of what I wanted to tease out with these is, these are the top performing posts of the last year. And this is a question for you guys, so I might just throw it to you, but what metric do you think makes a successful post? Because you can see here, we've sort of measured them by impressions, but I'm curious, throw them in the Q&A if you think there are other things that are more important than reach in this case. And I suppose to give you an example of why these things reached the way they did, the milk run one, which obviously was the most successful, was me, I guess, having a contrary opinion to the market. So I don't know if you remember what happened or if you followed it, but they went under and a lot of people lost a lot of money on the news stations. People were blasting the investors and the founder and saying it was stupid that they even created the business and that it was irresponsible to build something up like that with that business model, and it was VC gone mad and all these things. And I actually thought it was really horrendous the way that they were talking about an incredible founder who built an incredible brand, who took on the monopolies with a really different business model. And in fact, in the end, after all that happened, I think Woolies bought the brand still and the website. So, but he just kind of ran out of steam to try to do it on his own. And because the other guys came and competed, and fair kudos to Woolies and Coles, they stepped up and they launched competitive businesses instead of keeping their head in the sand. And anyway, I just thought it was really horrible. So I took a contrary perspective. I went and defended the team and I defended the investors. And I was very vocal about it. And then I personalized it. I talked about how it would make me feel because I'm a founder too. And just that it was a bit tall poppy, like, I really would hope that if that happened to me, and it probably may, the odds are terrible. I'm pretty sure it won't, but the odds are not in my favor. I would hope that, people would receive a failure in a much more positive light and support you to move on to the next step because you've done incredibly well to get where you are. So, but that was awesome because after that, I actually saw heaps of other people take the same perspective and follow on, and people with much more voice than I have from much more famous investors and founders. And that became a storm. And I don't know if I was the first to take that view, but I didn't see anyone else, but I was pretty early. So that I got a lot of support for. I also got a lot of conjecture, but it started a conversation. Then the other one here is me announcing my TED Talk recently, and that was pretty big news to my community. And so that's just people celebrating. But yeah, I suppose to the question that I asked, here are the same sort of analogy, but looked at as through the lens of engagement instead of reach. And you can see that this thing flipped around. So even though that milk run one had, like, I think it was more than double the reach, it had less engagements. So I would argue that the TED Talk announcement was actually more successful, but it's probably because every time someone wrote a comment back to me and said, well done, that's cool, I wrote something back to them and said, thank you so much. I feel so humbled, and this is like pinching myself that it's happening. And then the other one, you can see we announced a deal with Walgreens, and we just we just had so many people celebrating us, which was great. And we wrote back. So these three probably do well because we're writing an opinion, people are writing back, we're writing back to them, you're getting a lot of stuff underneath. So if you move to the next one, the last thing I kind of want to say is that, and I think this was the last post I wrote, but I just put it up because what I think is the most important in trying to tell the stories through LinkedIn or anything is to be authentic and to try to sort of put yourself out there enough that you can let people, as much as you're willing to, come into your personal life and understand kind of who you are. And so this was me on this trip. I'm actually coming to you from San Francisco right now. I just flew over here from New York, where I was pitching my seed round. And so, but I put up this picture that my daughter drew of me, and I just made a little funny anecdote. You can probably go and find it, saying, hey, if you're looking for me on the subway, I'm this happy-go-lucky guy wearing a Vera t-shirt, according to my 6-year-old daughter. Anyway, and that's kind of actually was very well received as well by my community. Lots of people giving me encouragement and thinking that's kind of cute. So I just think you've got to approach things from a really human perspective and a really personal perspective. And the last thing I'd say is I'm probably pretty guilty of not using enough of the formats that are out there. And I kind of personally really need to spend time to crack video and to be able to employ that in much more detail into the way that I'm trying to tell my stories here. So that's something I've sort of taken away from today already, is that I need to pull my finger out with that. But that's kind of my tips and tricks. And lovely to talk with you. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Awesome. We do have one from VJ that says, Stephen, great work on building your brand, which has a halo impact on your company. Have you explored CTAs for some of your posts, call to actions for some of your posts? Yeah,
yes. So especially as it pertains to fundraising at the moment, and then also to prospecting. So we'll often say, I suppose when we first launched, we were saying, if you know anyone out there who's experiencing dementia, please DM me or send them to the website. And we've seen lift after posts, put it that way, of people hitting the website and downloading the app and doing trials. But I've had really great success using this for fundraising because, fundraising is really difficult to work out, especially if you're doing it here in America. And Australia as well, but there's so many funds. There's thousands and thousands of them, and they're all really hard to reach. So you've got to try to work out which ones are going to potentially have a good fit with their thesis and what you're trying to do. And for us, that's hard because what we're doing is so unique. Even though it's healthcare, other people think it's music, and we're like, well, no, all our customers are healthcare people. So we're a healthcare company, we just happen to use music. And for a lot of funds and investors, they just can't wrap their head around it. It's like, I can't put this square in a box. It's so yeah. But we've found that by going on LinkedIn, saying where we're going to be, saying that there's a round coming, people are finding us. They're sharing it with other people that they know will be interested, and then that's leading to a really successful trip.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Well, that's all we've got time for today. So after this, you will all receive an email from us that has the recording, the pack that you've just seen, and a very short survey, because we, of course, love your feedback and any questions that you might have. Thank you all so much for your time today. Stephen, thank you so much as well. It's just awesome to hear the Music Health story. Best of luck for the rest of your raise, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everyone.
Chicka bam bam, BlueMelon.